Hi guys, this is Nadia from Valley Crafts, and today I want to show you how to create a hammered wire pendant. Don't forget to subscribe because I upload new stuff all the time. I quite often do kits for these tutorials, and I have half round and square wire and other PDF tutorials on my website and my Etsy shop, so pop over to check out what's available if you like. If you want to share your make, join our Wire Wrap and Jewelry Artist Worldwide Facebook group. We're a fun bunch, so come and join us. Right, so let's get started. So we're going to begin with our thick wire. So now I've used square wire for this, just simply because I like the integrity it creates. The square profile allows the wire to grip that I'm going to wrap around it very nicely, so I really like using it for structural components. But if you don't have square, you can definitely use round as well. That works. Doesn't really matter as long as it's quite thick so that it doesn't bend out of shape. So we're going to create a navette shape or marquise shape depending on what you call it, and we're going to make it just big enough so that the stone sits comfortably in the middle and has a bit of space above and below. So obviously that's going to change with the size of stone that you have, just adjusted roughly to that. So we're going to bend the legs so that they are parallel and make sure the shape is nice. So we're going to next grab a piece of half round wire. Again, if you don't have half round, you can also use normal round wire. I would go with your 0.6 wire then as well, because that's a little bit thicker than your 0.4, but again, it's personal preference. The half round is beautiful for this sort of application because it's half round flat profile, gives you the width and the shine of the wire, but it doesn't give you the sort of projection of a round wire, if that makes any sense. So what we're going to do is we're wrapping this wire around the two bale legs, as I call them. I'm sure they've got a better name, but that's what I call them. So we're going to wrap this until we have about, I think this is about 4 centimeters. I didn't actually measure it, but you can, this is again personal preference. It doesn't have any bearing on, you know, the sort of structural side of things, so it doesn't really matter. You can decide how long you want it. So we're going to continue until we reach the top, and I've got a little bit of wire left over. So that's what it looks like. So next I'm going to bend this forward a little bit. This is so that when I create the round shape with my bale, that it doesn't, the loop doesn't sit at the back. I hope that makes sense. But you'll see what I mean just now. So we're going to bend the legs outward a little bit, and then we're going to fold this in. So you can see, because I've bent the wires forward a little bit, the loop that I'm making kind of sits on top of everything. There we go. So next I'm going to attach these together, and then we're going to use the leftover wire to create the back frame. That's what it looks like so far. So next I'm going to separate out the leftover wires, and these are going to become part of the backing where the stone will sit in. So I'm splitting this in half. You can measure the length if you want. You can use a marker pen if that makes it easier. I go by eye, which wasn't always a good thing because it can get skewed, but luckily, you know, wire like this is easily adjustable at this stage, so you can go by if you want to. So going to bend these in, and that's what it looks like so far. So it's kind of like a diamond shape in the center, and then I'm going to bend the legs outwards again. So grab this at the bottom and kind of bend it out. Again, you can, you know, use a ruler, and you can use a marker pen. Koki, we call it in South Africa. I had to actually remember that I mustn't call this here because people don't know what I'm talking about. So yeah, marker pen. And it's really important at this stage, when you are attaching this wire, which is what we're going to do next, that you do it really symmetrical. This is important for the small accent stone that we're going to slot. So now we've got this shape. I'm going to trim off some of the wires at the top because I'm known as the octopus queen. I've always got a bit of wire left over. In this case, I'm cutting it because I'm going to use what's left to bind the frame to, well, the inside frame to the outside frame, basically. It's really easy. So just basically lash the outside to the inside, whichever way you see fit, and as long as it's secure, it doesn't really matter how you do it because it's going to be mostly hidden anyway. I generally tend to go around each frame once. There we go. And then I'm going to flatten it out with a pair of pliers. I'm going to repeat this with the other side, and I'm also going to do the bottom to bind them together. So once I've done that, the next step is to attach. So it's going to be a little bit fiddly because obviously it's quite thick wire, so just really take your time with that, don't rush it. If I rush, the wire doesn't tend to behave the way I want it to, so if you take it slow, it'll work much easier. So kind of guide the wire and squeeze the loop as you go along. And we're going to attach it like that. As I said earlier, it's really important that it's symmetrical, so that there's exactly the same spacing between each wrap, so that the accent stone, whatever you're going to add, is actually sitting right in the center. So if one wrap is a little bit higher than the other, the accent stone is going to be quite skew. So next we're going to shape one of the legs upwards. So I've already bent it inwards. So if you have a look here, there is a little kink at the bottom which is going to hold the amethyst pair in place. So again, it's really important that both sides are symmetrical. So I'm going to do the other side. So I bent it in, and this is how I'm doing it. So I'm holding it down. I'm using a pair of pliers. Again, you could measure it, but I've just gone by eye, which isn't, as I said, not always the best way, because it sometimes can be a bit skew. So it's always better to, if you're not sure how to do it, to maybe measure it. So then I'm shaping the wire. So I'm using my fingers to kind of give it a rounded appearance, like that. And obviously remember, if you have a bigger stone or smaller stone, you need to adjust the wire length for this. Always better to go longer rather than shorter, for obvious reasons. All right, so the next step is we're going to thin out the ending of the wire. So we're going to use my roundness pliers, and what I tend to do is gently squeeze and taper the wire. So if you use a little bit of force, it will thin the wire at the end, and it gives you a beautiful finished sort of swirl end, if that makes sense. So I've squeezed it, and now I'm twisting it ever so slightly. Now again, the length of this will depend on your stone. You kind of fit it over the stone so that the swirl just sits on top and catches the stone. So we're going to do the same on the other side. So now I've done the frame, and I've kind of molded it around the stone. So you need to adjust the wire, fold it sideways and press it into the stone so that the wire hugs it like this. And then we test that everything sits. So next we're going to bend these swirls outward again. So be gentle, because obviously the more you bend, especially heavy gauge wire, the more brittle it becomes. So don't bend it back and forth too much, because it will break, especially if it has got a mark somewhere which weakens the wire already. So be very gentle and careful with that. So we're going to hammer the swirls only. You can hammer the wire as well. I mean, the bottom wires as well. I didn't. I just hammered the swirls. Just remember with hammering is, when the blows need to travel in a direction, you want the wire to expand. So when you're hitting it, go slow. You don't need much force. Just when you're hitting it, go into the direction that you want the wire to expand. I've got several tutorials that I've done on hammering, so you can have a look at that as well if you want more detail on that. I've done quite a few where it shows you exactly how to do the hammering. So to get the detail on the inside, I use the sort of round ball side of the hammer so that I can reach right in. So that's what it looks like, and just make sure they're quite even. So frame's ready. So I've molded the shape some more to make sure everything fits 100%. So I'm slotting in my stones again to make sure that they sit 100%. And I'm quite happy with that. So now we're going to move on to the next step. So we're going to make coils. So this is a fun technique. I absolutely adore working with coils, and the way this works is we have two base wires. So one is the small base wire and one is the big base wire. I'm using a Bosch drill which has got a sort of adjustable chuck, which makes work life so much easier. You can hand coil them, but this is so much quicker, and you'll see why for just now. So we're going to grab the 0.6, which is the 22 gauge wire, as the base, and our 0.426 gauge as the sort of weaving coiling wire. So we're taking both of those and we insert them into the chuck, and I'm tightening this as much as I can. So you get these drills quite cheap on eBay or so, secondhand. It doesn't need to be expensive at all, like 14 bucks or something like that. So, and it works like a dream. I use it for all my coils. There are purists out there that don't like using drills. I think it saves a lot of time, so I'm quite fond of it. So make sure that you have it going in a direction that you're comfortable with. Mine goes clockwise. So then I put my thumb over where the wire sits, and you can see that the sort of base wire wants to flip-flop around. And you have to go quite slow, so that's going to be quite frustrating. So at the beginning you just kind of push and you hold in place. Now, to help this from flopping or stopping it from flopping around, what I do normally is I either have some tube or anything that I can slide the wire in. For the purpose of this tutorial, I'm using an empty wire roll, and I slide the wire in, which will stop the roll or the wire from flopping around like that. Obviously you have something a bit heavier, so it doesn't move like this does, but it just shows you the technique, so you can go a little bit faster. Keep your thumb over the wire, the wrapping wire, to make sure that it's nice and neat. You just have to be careful not to pull too hard. You can see at the beginning of the chuck my wire is starting to buckle slightly, and that is because there's resistance there. So be careful, because you can shear your base wire if you pull too hard. So that's that done, and the next step is to take a thicker base wire, which is 0.820 gauge, and we are going to wrap the small base wire with the coiled wire onto that bigger base wire. So I'm starting off with a couple of wraps, and then I am simply looping that smaller coil, or that coil we just created, with the 0.6 22 gauge, wrapping it around that new base wire. So this is generally the wire that is then going to be used, to continue your designs, and to add detail. You can also trim it off, but I quite like to use wires like this that come out, the 0.8 wire, to create further details in my design, but it's personal preference. So once we've done that, it's much easier when you have a couple of millimeters wrapped, so then you can start by coiling it. So everybody's got slightly different techniques on how they do their coils. This is what works for me, so you're just going to have to kind of try and see what works for you. But yeah, just keep twisting and take your time with that. And it's quite important that the small base wire is long enough, because when you are twisting, the coiled wire tends to expand and grow and slide along your 0.6 millimeter base wire, because obviously it's being pushed along. So it needs to be, the base wire, the small base wire needs to be long enough. So just going to continue wrapping, and if you wanted to, you can use the small base wire to continue coiling on your big base wire. That creates some added detail. In this case, I haven't done that. I have just used the base wire to tie off the coil. So I've only wrapped a couple of times, but you could just carry on. It create some nice detail. So you could just go all the way up to the top, or whatever is left of the small coil base wire. It looks quite nice in some designs. So in this case, I haven't used it. So what we're going to do next is using the leftover base wire, weaving wire, and we're going to slot this wire. I'm going to twist it, and the sort of shape of the coil will guide this wire to sit into the grooves. I quite like doing this because it gives your coils a very refined look, very smooth. You can already tell the difference between where the wire is wrapped around and where there isn't any. So I just continue to slide the wire, or slot the wire into the slots, and then all I'm going to do is at the end give it a couple of wraps. And I tend to pull quite hard to slot the weaving wire into some of the wraps of the 0.6 wire. I hope that makes sense. Then I'm going to just trim it off. Do the same on the other side. And that's your coil. So then you can press down on each end if you wanted it to be tight in the middle so that it doesn't move. But yeah, that's your coil. So I made two, exactly the same length. And one thing I would like to say to that is also make sure you make them both at the same time. Cut the same length of wire at the same time to make sure that you have exactly the same length, because each coil is slightly different obviously from the last, because you know it's handmade and they're not always perfect. So we're going to slide these coils in near the bottom and then near the top, and we're going to kind of wrap these coils around the stone. So I'm going to pull this in ever so gently on each side, and then I'm going to wrap. That's what I was talking about earlier when I said you could use the base wires for further decoration. So I've got these coil base wires, and I'm going to use these to do some more work with later. So for now we're going to attach these to the frame. So I'm going to go just behind the wrap where the frame attaches to, well, the stone frame attaches to the main frame. So you want to make sure that it is behind, so on the upper part of that. You wrap it around there a couple of times, twice. So I've only done it once there, but do it twice so that it's nice and tight. So I'm going to do the same. So it's still quite easy to add wires at this stage because there's a lot of space and quite a few gaps. It can get quite tricky when you have a busy piece with a lot of wires, but you'll always find a way to slot the wires in. So I'm going to do the same on the other side. It can be a little bit fiddly, but just take your time with that, and remember to attach the base wire behind. There we go. And we're going to attach to the top as well. It's quite satisfying actually to be able to attach these and eventually get something that resembles a pendant. So that's what it looks like so far. So next, there's quite a few videos I think that use this technique, so I will put a link to underneath this tutorial to show you how to make a prong setting. So I haven't added it to this video to keep the lengths quite short. I've made a tutorial for this already, so I will direct you to the link for that. So we've created a prong setting and we are going to slide this 8mm stone in place, and I'm going to use the legs of this setting and I'm going to attach it to the frame, so the outside frame, not the inside. So I'm going to attach, so bring it across, and I'm going to shape it around the frame. Oh, I'm talking rubbish. I've actually attached it to the inside frame first. I thought I hadn't. Okay, so it can get quite tight at this stage, so use your pliers. I've got some fine tipped ones which I love because they really help me to grip wires. I've also got some watchmaker pliers which are really fine, which are fantastic for grabbing weaving wires when you want to pull them out. So you can see. So make sure you keep your finger over the stone. It's still quite loose at the moment, obviously, so it will pop out. Don't worry if that happens. We're going to tie it off later. So make sure that the stone is very secure. You don't want it flopping around, so just make sure when you attach it on the other side that it's nice and tight as well, and wrap it around the frame twice. I'm just showing you once here, otherwise the video would be far too long, so just do it twice. There you go. Pull it through. So once we've attached it, that's what it looks like. There we go. So next we've attached it to the outside frame. So we're bringing it up and we are now going to bring in a piece of weaving wire. And we're going to find the midpoint. And I'm going to slide it through the bail, and what we're going to do is create a very simple sort of hand wrapped coil on the two inside most, is that what, can you call it that, inside most top wires. So just feed it through and we're going to wrap it. There you go. So just take your time. It's always a little bit more difficult when you close to the frame. I tend to use my pliers quite a bit to push the weaves together. I'm quite a slow wrapper because I do a lot of adjusting and pushing, and it's okay. I find it works better for me. So I'm going to continue. So we've got a good length here, and just make sure you've got enough so that you can fold it. Again, as I said, it's going to change with, you know, different sizes stones. So kind of adjust it to what you want it to look like. So if you wanted anything like that, make it about 4 or 5 centimeters, and then we're going to just feed it through the frame right underneath the crisscross. So we want to use where the stone frame is attached to the main frame to hold it in place. So we're going to attach it to the lower part of the pendant. Again, fight the wire in this case, because it doesn't want to go through. So again, you find pliers work. So we're going to pull this through, and we're going to pull it until it meets the weave. That's what it looks like so far. So I'm going to do the other side as well. So we've attached this at the base, we've got both of them attached, and now we're just going to use the remaining wires, and we're kind of going to follow the first wire, and we're going to attach it underneath right below. So this is just detail, there's nothing structural to it. So just you know, create a shape that's pleasing to your eye and attach it below the first wire with 2 wraps on the frame. As I said, I don't show you both wraps because it would take forever. It's quite tricky to get the wire through. So I've attached it now. I've saved you the watching me do it, so I fast forwarded. So now we're going to create a very simple 2x5 wrap. So we're going to start with 2 wraps around both wires. I'll put a little insert on the side here to show you what I'm doing, and then we're going to do about 5 wraps around the top wire. So super easy. So it's 2 wraps around both base wires and then 5 wraps around the top base wire only. And we're going to repeat this, and I always tend to again push in my weaves, and then I'm going to continue with that. So again, it's your 2 wraps, and then I'm going to go and do 2 base wraps around the base wire. 5 rather, sorry, what am I talking about today? Right, here we go. So wrap this around, and I'm using my pliers to push the weaves in. And that's what it looks like. So I'm going to continue with this on both sides until I have enough. So remember, obviously, again, it changes for your stone, for whatever size you have. So once we've done that, you can always test it before attaching it to see if it kind of looks the same. So we're going to fold it upwards. We're going to follow the same shape and the first few wires to roughly give it a sort of layered look. So we're going to fold it up. On both sides, and I always work on both sides at the same time just to make sure. So when I do one side, I always immediately do the other side, because for me personally it helps me to create better symmetry. It may not work for you, and it, you know, different people do it different ways. It's just what works for me, but I always recommend to do one side and then immediately after the other, because it really does help with symmetry, and you can adjust as you go along, and it just takes a small unevenness in a symmetrical piece to kind of set off a chain reaction. So yeah, for me that's what works. So next, at the bottom, we're going to bring the one leftover wire, and we're going to bring it on the inside of the amethyst. And now it's really important to kind of wrap this wire on the inside, pointing not towards the center of the stone, but towards the outside of the stone. And the reason being is we want to wrap this wire, we want it to be as close as possible to the amethyst sides, because we're going to kind of lay it over the sides of the stone. So once you've wrapped it around the frame, we're going to pull the wire in, and we're going to do the same on the other side. So I'm going to push this through, and this is why I wanted the wrap to be on the outside, going towards the outside rather than the inside. I think I'm going to put an insert in so that you can see what I'm talking about. So that's what it looks like attached, and then we're going to use a pair of pliers to adjust that wire. We're going to fold it and mold it around the stone, and of course keep it nice and tight. And I'm going to do an extra wrap around the frame. Generally, if you only see me do one wrap, do 2. That's what I'm doing. I'm just not showing you both, because otherwise we would be here all day in some cases. So just pull that through, and that's secure. So we're going to do the same on the other side now, obviously. So that's what it looks like. So we're nearly done. So what we're going to do next is use that wire, that last wire, and we're going to follow again the initial shape and travel up the stone, and we're going to attach that wire to the frame somewhere, wherever you can find space. Obviously the smaller the sort of distance between the last point of contact and the attachment to the frame, the better, because obviously there's less of a sort of floppy length. I hope that makes sense. So pulling it through, you can see it gets a little bit more difficult as you get to, you know, the pendant gets busier. And then we're going to adjust the shape, and we're going to do the same on the other side as well, bend it up. So now I'm cutting off all the unnecessary wires. I'm always quite reluctant to cut them off because I always want to use them for something else quite often. So next we're going to use a piece of 0.4 wire. You can also use 0.6 if you want to use thicker wires, and adding a couple of beads, just enough to make sure that the stone is held in place. The stone should be quite secure, but I always want to add extra security for it not to fall out anyway. So I'm going to use this to hold the stone in place. So I'm going to fold it on one side and add my beads to the other, and I'm going to attach to the frame on each side. So fold that through and make sure it goes through the arch of where we created a little swirl, so that there's an extra anchor that holds it in place, and then we're going to attach it to the frame on the side here. So just bring it through there and attach it to the frame. So, and yeah, that's that. So trim off your last wires, and that's the whole pendant done. So I really hope you enjoyed this, and thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to see what I get up to, visit my Instagram and my Facebook. And obviously if you want to share your work and join our community group, visit Wire Wrap and Jewelry Artists Worldwide group on Facebook. And again, lastly but not least, I always have some interesting little tutorials on my Etsy shop, as well as kits for these tutorials. So pop over and check them out, and see what I've got. So thank you so much for watching, and see you soon.